Hi there, friendos. I hope you're smiling, and if not, then that's okay. You do you. Welcome to Murder and Muscles. My name is Trisha. If you're into working out and true crime, then hit that subscribe button. If you're not into working out, but you're into true crime or vice versa, then hit that subscribe button. See what happens. Today's workout is a full body complex session. We are going to warm up together, we're going to work out together, we're going to cool down together. It's all included. I'm going to be using a set of dumbbells that I'll put on the screen. Use what you have if you're doing the workout, and if you're not, then just listen. So this is the case of the Lindbergh Baby. It's a roller coaster, so buckle in, grab your weights if you're working out. We're going to dive in. Charles Lindbergh was an American aviator, if you didn't know, a military officer, an inventor, and an activist. In 1927, at the age of 25, he shot up in popularity and became world famous for winning the Orteig Prize for making the first solo nonstop flight from New York to Paris on May 20th to the 21st. Charles was born in February on the 4th in 1902 in Detroit, Michigan. In December of 1927, he flew to Mexico at the request of the American government to show goodwill, and whilst in Mexico, he met Anne Spencer Marrow, daughter of Dwight W. Marrow, the American ambassador there. They married in 1929. Charles taught Anne how to fly, which is super cool, and the two flew together on many expeditions, charting new routes. Anne also became well known for her poetry and writing. On June 22nd of 1930, they welcomed their son, Charles Augustus Jr. They were overjoyed. The family were happy, and as far as I could research, they were the model family. Little did they know that in little less than 2 years later, on another Tuesday, a sinister, cruel, and monumental event involving Charles Augustus Jr. would also occur. On the second Tuesday, roughly 20 months after Charles Augustus Jr. was born, and by the way, I'll be referring to him as Charles or Little Charles from here on out because his name is a mouthful, he disappeared. Yeah. From the Lindbergh home near Hopewell, New Jersey. I guess Hopewell is hopeful. Little Charles had been ill during the last week and in February of 1932. On March 1st, the family were home and little Charles's nurse, Betty Gow, rubbed some medication on his chest to relieve congestion. At roughly 7:30 p.m., Anne and Betty put Charles to bed in the upstairs nursery. Betty then carried about her chores, cleaning and organizing medications in another part of the upstairs, I believe. At 10 p.m., Betty went to check on Charles, as was her routine, and discovered to her horror, Charles was not asleep in his crib. In fact, he was nowhere to be found. Charles Lindbergh later, so this is the father, later shared his gut reaction. Yes, the son was named after a father, if you didn't catch that. I went upstairs to the child's nursery, opened the door, and immediately noticed the lifted window. A strange-looking envelope lay on the sill. I looked at the crib. It was empty. I ran downstairs and grabbed my rifle and then went out into the night." End quote. But Charles would search in vain that night. He would not find his son at all. And that strange-looking envelope? Well, it would become the only clue to find Charles. This envelope held a poorly written ransom note for the Lindbergh family, and the note read, "Dear Sir, have $50,000 ready, $25,000 in 20 bills, $15,000 in $10 bills, and $10,000 in $5 bills. After 2 to 4 days, we'll inform you where to deliver the money. I don't know how to pronounce that. We warn you for making any ding public or to notify the police. The child is in gut care. Indication for all letters are signature and 3 holds." These kidnappers did not know that this would become the talk of Tuttletown. Yes, I'm making this phrase a thing. Make it a thing with me. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you should watch the first installment of Murder and Muscles. Shameless plug. The video is up on my channel. Have a workout, have a listen. If you don't like the workout, then just listen. Leave me a comment on what you think. All right, where were we? Oh yeah, okay. The Hopewell police were notified, and after that, a report was then filed. By 10:30 p.m. that night, radio news bulletins were announcing the story to the entire country, and each newspaper had made the kidnapping their March 2nd headline. It wouldn't surprise you then to know that soon claims of sightings of little Charles were made from California, Michigan, Mexico. None of these sightings were genuine, and soon this investigation had to move to the New Jersey State Police. Colonel H. Norman Schwarzkopf was officially in charge of the investigation, but he willingly gave responsibility to Charles Lindbergh, which, in my opinion, would be the reason for a plethora of errors. Not that I don't love Charles, but there were so many errors in this investigation. You'll hear them as they come along. He was not an expert either. He wasn't an expert or an expert. He was an aviator. The New Jersey State Police searched the kidnapping scene and found traces of mud on the floor of the nursery. What appeared to be footprints led from little Charles's crib to the window. These footprints were trampled and subsequently were impossible to measure, which is so interesting to me. I love that they just trampled over the footprints. How did they know they were even footprints then? I mean, you can assume, but it's not good to assume. And they didn't even take photos of these footprints to follow up. The police also found 2 sections of a ladder that did not belong to the family that had been used to reach this window. It was a very crudely built ladder, and one of the 2 sections had broken where one section of the ladder joined to the other, and this indicated that it had broken at some point in time, either in the ascent or the descent, which is also interesting to me. Nowhere in my research did I find that they knew that the ladder hadn't been broken before. There's just so many things unknown. They found no fingerprints around the nursery, and there were no bloodstains either. So they knew there were footprints. They couldn't measure them. They knew there was a ladder. They knew it was broken. They didn't know why. They didn't know when. They knew that little Charles was gone. There was a note demanding money, no fingerprints, no blood. Sounds like they've got a lot of work to do, and you are correct. All employees of the household were questioned and investigated, and nothing resulted at that time from that either. A headquarters of sorts was established in the Lindbergh home near the crime scene, which is another thing that I think was not wise. Lindbergh appointed an intermediary to deal with the kidnappers. But it was a competition, it seemed, to others for who would be communicating to the kidnappers. I mean, it was a very popular case. People wanted fame, all that kind of stuff. Would you volunteer as tribute? Tell me in the comments. Well, these kidnappers, seeing all of this publicity, started to see a little more value in little Charles. So on March 6th of 1932, Lindbergh received a second ransom note. Now, the demand had increased from $50,000 to $70,000. I know that doesn't seem like a lot now. Well, actually, it does seem like a lot now, not gonna lie. But back in the day, it was a large sum of money. Now, in 1930, there wasn't the standard police procedures that we have when handling a kidnapping case. I tried to locate the police procedures for handling a kidnapping in 1930s, and there weren't any documented procedures. The oldest documentation I found was from 1970. I also found a document from the New York State Police, which stated that when it comes to the press, under no circumstances will any member of the service make any statements. This could alarm the kidnappers or do as this kidnapper did, increase the ransom note or take other drastic measures. So, back to the $70,000 now. Once this was received, a police conference was held. Yes, they had a conference. They called the governor of Trenton, New Jersey. There were prosecuting officials and police authorities. Private investigators were hired, but there was still nothing to be seen of little Charles. The kidnappers were evading every single one of these people. It's not funny. I promise you it's not funny. It's just there are so many people, and yet this little baby could not be found. Then on March 8th, of 1932, a third ransom note was sent to Lindbergh. By the time this case is done, there will be several ransom notes, and I promise, I hope you're not taking a shot. I hope that you aren't lifting weights you know what? Just start to count in your head how many ransom notes there are, and let me know in the comments. This ransom note said that an intermediary appointed by the Lindbergh would not be accepted. It had an ad that had to be placed in the newspaper. So this kidnapper wanted an ad to be placed in the newspaper. It's like they were seeking fame, but they didn't want to be known. It's so confusing. The nerve. On that same date, a Dr. John F. Condon from the Bronx published an offer to act as the intermediary and also pay an additional $1,000 in ransom. Quote, I stand ready in person at my own expense to go anywhere, alone, on land or water, to give the kidnapper the extra money and promise never to utter his or her name to anyone, end quote. That was in his letter. Dr. Condon was a retired school principal. So this is where I want to chat briefly and a little bit more about Dr. Condon and where the dickens this fellow came from, because he is referred to as a cheerful but loquacious character, often stopping people he was passing in the street with math problems he'd devised. He viewed the kidnapping as an attack on the nation and wanted to join the fight. But Condon kind of turned into a little bit of a fame seeker. It was said that he would do or say anything to keep his name in the public eye, to the extent that he became a point of frustration to the law enforcement officials involved in the case. On March 9th, Dr. Condon received a fourth ransom note saying that he was accepted as a go-between intermediary. Colonel Lindbergh approved this, and so on March 10th of 1932, Dr. Condon received $70,000 in cash, the ransom money. He sent a note in the newspaper indicating to the kidnappers that he had the money using the code name Jafsy. Now, this code name had been devised by Colonel Lindbergh, taking the initials of Condon, JFC, and when you talk fast, it became Jafsy. Can you imagine living in this time? This is out in the public, playing out in the newspaper, the kidnapper communicating to an intermediary. Reading this in the morning paper would have been so interesting with your cup of coffee. Just had to put that out there. Lord. But it continues. On March 12th, Dr. Condon received an anonymous phone call, and then he received a fifth ransom note from a taxi cab driver named Joseph Perrone. Remember Joseph Perrone, he comes back later. Joseph claimed that he received this letter from an unidentified stranger, and we're taking quite a few people at their word here. Everyone just believed him. This fifth ransom note said that there was another note waiting for Condon hidden beneath a stone about 100 feet away from the nearest subway station. Condon found that note, and this note told him to meet with the kidnappers at the Woodlawn Cemetery. Condon, accompanied by a bodyguard, met an unidentified man who called himself John. So original, in the cemetery. They discussed the ransom, and this John agreed to bring a token of the boy's thing, I guess, as proof of life and identity. I don't know how much Charles had on him when he was kidnapped. So a few days passed, and Dr. Condon continued with the advertisements in the paper. And then, on March 6th, a ransom note and a baby's sleeping suit. So they just stripped the baby of its clothes and sent that to Dr. Condon. Wise, these kidnappers. The baby suit was identified to be little Charles's. And then on March 21st, an eighth ransom note was received by Dr. Condon. This eighth note asked for complete compliance and also let Condon know, and subsequently the world, that the kidnapping had been planned for a year. Oh, I feel like, why? Why did you have to let them know that? Then on March 29th, the nurse, remember her, Betty Gow? Well, she found the infant's soother at the end of the entrance to the estate. I really hope that you are just in awe of how the nurse found the soother and searched the premises, but the police did not. Goodness gracious. You see what I mean here? There are so many mistakes. Lord. Then, March 30th, yes, you get it, Condon received a ninth ransom note. This note threatened to increase the ransom to the amount of $100,000 and also refused a code for use in the newspaper columns. We are into the next month now. On April 1st, 1932, a 10th ransom note was received by Condon. This one instructed him to have the money ready the following night. And so Condon replied by press. On April 2nd, you guessed it, yet another ransom note was delivered to Condon by another taxi driver. If you're doing the workout, I hope you're enjoying the rest here. I hope you're drinking some water. These people must be crazy. These kidnappers are ridiculous. As you can see, goodness gracious. Let me just say I'm a little unimpressed. Anyhow, On April 2nd, yet another ransom note was delivered to Condon by another taxi driver, as I'd mentioned. This taxi driver claimed to have received the note from an unidentified man. This note told Condon that there was yet another note under a stone in front of the greenhouse at 3225 East Tremont Avenue, Bronx, New York. This, I think, makes it the 12th note. May have lost count. You tell me in the comments. The amount was then reduced to $50,000, which I do not understand. This money was handed to Condon, who called John, and in exchange, there was yet another ransom note to Condon. Condon swore he would be able to identify this John. Now, there was how many notes? I think 13. This 13th note stated that little Charles would be found on a boat named Nellie near Martha's Vineyard. Charles drove to the boat with Condon in the car, and after a search of many hours of this boat, they found nothing. Yes, 13 ransom notes, I think, and over 30 days later, they were literally nowhere. I use the word literally very sparingly because everybody uses it. They weren't figuratively nowhere. They were literally nowhere with this case. Nowhere. 72 days later, yes, on May 12th of 1932, a William Allen, an assistant on a truck driven by Orville Wilson, accidentally found a partly buried and badly decomposed body of a baby. This was later positively identified to be little Charles. He was found about 4.5 miles southeast from the Lindbergh home and roughly 45 feet away from the highway. They were able to examine the teeth of his body, and poor little Charles had been essentially dropped, I think. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think happened. But his head was crushed and there was a hole in his skull. So it's safe to say that little Charles had been dead from the very day that he was kidnapped due to the amount of decomposition. That's what they surmised. So now this kidnapping investigation became a murder investigation. And to understand the investigation, we need to take a little bit of a step back to March 2nd, when all of this began. On March 1st at 9 p.m., they believed that that is when little Charles was abducted from his crib. And back when it was discovered that he had been kidnapped, a conference was held with the Attorney General Cummings, and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover had led the New Jersey State Police at Trenton know that the U.S. Department of Justice would have the assistance of the FBI. The FBI acted from that point onward, though, only in an auxiliary capacity, and this meant that the whole time that Lindbergh and the investigating officer who had surrendered the lead to Lindbergh, that Colonel H. Norman Schwarzkopf, had basically the highest level of movement on this case. They were calling all of the shots. I don't know how best to say that. I said it the most awkward way possible. On March 13th in 1932, the President of the United States ordered that all governmental investigative agencies should assist the New Jersey State Police and that the FBI serve in a greater capacity. 10 days after that, the FBI let the banks know that they were watching the ransom money closely. The serial numbers from the money used to pay the ransom had been recorded, which is funny because Lindbergh didn't think that that was a good idea. I don't know about this Lindbergh. The first bill surfaced in New York 3 days after the ransom was made, and the authorities did not act on this. 3 days after that, a reward of $25,000 was announced for any information on the kidnappers. Now, during this time, certain staff members were again interviewed, the staff members of the Lindbergh house. One of these persons was a Violet Sharp. She was a quick-witted English immigrant in her late 20s. She was a domestic servant. Her demeanor is recorded as defiant and uncooperative, and immediately, oh, that's hard for me to say. Immediately, suspicions were cast on her. When she was initially questioned, she had said that she went out on a blind date to a movie with another couple, but she was unable to recall their names nor any details of the movie that she'd seen. In another interview, she changed her story then, saying that they'd gone to a roadhouse instead. suspicious, or as Bailey Sarian says, highly sus. I think she says that. Anyhow, Colonel Schwarzkopf, I know I'm saying his name wrong, sorry in advance, or sorry just in general, but he didn't rule anyone out, despite the Lindbergh professing complete faith in their staff. So he announced that he would interview Sharp a third time. But before he could, on June 10th of 1932, a Violet Sharp committed suicide by swallowing poison. Now, some say that it was her guilt that led to her taking her own life, but the investigating authorities soon found that her movements had nothing to do with little Charles's murder. So she killed herself for nothing. Then on April 5th, President D. Roosevelt signed an Executive Order 6102 forbidding the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States. This required all persons to deliver their gold coins or gold bullion on or before May 1st, 1933. This proved to be very helpful because roughly 40,000 of the ransom money was paid in gold certificates, so having it returned would make it easier to track. On May 2nd, now in 1934, yes, we are 2 years essentially away from when the crime actually happened, the Reserve Bank of New York discovered 296 $10 gold certificates and one $20 gold certificate. All of this was Lindbergh ransom money. Despite extensive investigation, though, the depositor could not be located. The New York City Bureau office then engaged Dr. Condon in interviews, encouraging him to share all he knew of these conversations with the John character. Investigators also honed in on the ladder that the kidnapper had used. As I'd mentioned, it was crudely built, but it was clear that it was built by someone who was familiar with wood. They examined it for fingerprints, brought it in to be examined by carpenters as well, but to no avail. They then brought in Arthur Kohler of the Forest Service, U.S. Department of Agriculture, to examine the ladder. He compiled his findings in a report. Now, if you're doing these bicep curls with me, remember to squeeze your glutes and remember to breathe, keep your back straight, and a slight bend in your knees. Blink the sweat out of your eyes as you see that I am doing here. This is a tough workout. You can do it. Keep going. Let's get back to the story. Back to the gold certificates. None had been reported during the period between May of 1934 and August 1934. But then, on August 20th, 16 were discovered in the vicinity of Yorkville and Harlem. These gold certificates appeared to be turning up at corner grocery stores. Interesting. Just dropping gold coins, buy my bread. Then on September 18th, a $10 gold certificate was reported by the Corn Exchange Bank. Now, listen in here. This bill was received at the bank from a gasoline station located at 127th Street and Lexington Avenue. The attendant at this gasoline station was suspicious of the $10 gold certificate and recorded the license number of the automobile on the bill itself. This license had been issued to Bruno Richard Hopman of 1279 East 222nd Street, Bronx, New York. So, federal and local authorities closely surveilled the Hopman house until they saw an individual matching Dr. Condon's description of John. He left his house and walked to his automobile. He was immediately apprehended. Bruno Richard Hopman was a German immigrant, a carpenter who had been in the country for roughly 11 years. A $20 gold certificate was found on his person, and after a search of his garage, over 13,000 gold certificates were also discovered. Now remember that taxi cab driver, Joseph Perron? Well, he comes back into the story and he positively identifies Hopman as the man who had handed him the 5th ransom note. And then Dr. Condon identified this man who had been referred to as John as, the John. So there you have it. And his car, a Dodge sedan, was later to have been seen, or reported to have been seen, in the vicinity of the Lindbergh home prior to the kidnapping. Funny that nobody mentioned that before this. Conveniently remembering details. Then specimens of Hoffman's handwriting were sent to the FBI. These were studied and compared to the ransom notes. Remember, they had many samples. There were 13, I believe. And there were remarkable similarities between Hoffman's writing and these ransom notes. So who is this Hoffman? Well, let me tell you that this man was quite the character, or so history would have you believe it. He was from Saxony, Germany. He had a criminal record for robbery and had also spent time in prison there. In 1923 of July, he stowed away on the SS Hanover at Bremen, Germany, and arrived in New York on July 13th, 1923. He was arrested and deported instantly. He attempted again and failed in August, and then finally succeeded in November of 1923 on board the George Washington. He married an Anna Schloeffer, I'm not saying that correctly, Anna Schofler, and they'd had a son, Manfred, in 1933. He'd worked as a carpenter, but after the kidnapping on March 1st, he curiously stopped working and traded in stocks. Hoffman was indicted on charges of extortion on September 26, 1934, and on October 8th of 1934, he was indicted for murder. He was then sent to Hunterdon County Jail to await his trial. This began on January 3rd, 1935 in Flemington, New Jersey, and the trial lasted for 5 weeks. It was the talk of Tuttletown. Yes, I said I'm making it a thing. Help me make it a thing. They had the tool marks on the ladder matching that of Hoffman's tools. Wood as flooring in his attic matched the wood of the ladder. Dr. Condon's phone number and address were found scrawled on a door frame inside his closet. His handwriting matched that of the ransom notes that he had positively identified by 2 people, as John and the person who handed him the 5th ransom note. So it seems like everything is piling up against Hoffman. On February 13th, 1935, the jury returned a verdict, guilty, and the sentence was death. The defense appealed and the Supreme Court upheld the verdict of the lower court. On December 9th of 1935, he was to be electrocuted on January 17th, 1936. But on this very same day, the governor of New Jersey granted a 30-day reprieve. So, on February 17th, 1936, he was resentenced to be electrocuted in the week of March 30th. On March 30th, Hoffman appealed and was denied clemency. And on April 3rd, 1936, at roughly 8:47 p.m., Bruno Richard Hoffman was electrocuted. I think it's fair to say that Hoffman didn't hide very well, but also it's fair to say that this whole investigation could have been much more efficient. I know it was in the 1930s. I know that they were working with what they had. They were just humans trying to do the best thing. But now here's the thing here. There were so many doubts about Hoffman's guilt the entire way leading up to his death, and he denied and proclaimed his innocence vehemently. There were also whispers of planted evidence in his home, the $13,000 in gold coins, the scrawled phone number on the closet, the wood, and the tools, and so on. On 2 separate occasions in 1980, Anna Hoffman, his wife, sued the state of New Jersey for unjust execution of her husband, but both suits were dismissed. So even up until the 80s, Anna was refuting that he did not do this thing. Now, from this whole roller coaster was born the Lindbergh Act, which is also known as the Lindbergh Law. This is also known as the Federal Kidnapping Statute of 1932. It has many names. It prohibits the transportation of a kidnapped person across state lines. But funny thing, you may ask, Trisha, little Charles was not found across state lines. No, you're right. Very swift observation, dear listener. He wasn't. This law also makes it a crime to kidnap for ransom, reward, or otherwise as well, and that's this part. There's also indicators that this law was enacted just prior to Lindbergh and the kidnapping. So they named it after the Lindbergh Baby because of timing, essentially. There's a lot there to unpack. The law also provides that if the victim isn't released within 24 hours after being kidnapped, there is a rebuttable presumption. Now, what is a rebuttable presumption? Well, in common law and civil law, a rebuttable presumption, say that 10 times fast, I dare you, is an assumption made by a court that is taken to be a rule unless someone comes forward to contest it and prove otherwise. So a defendant in a criminal case is presumed innocent until proven guilty. So for this law, there is a rebuttable presumption that he or she has been transported in interstate for foreign commerce. Okay? But this case is riddled with errors and hearsay, mistakes and presumptions, and there is also a lot of fraud as well. People were pretending to know where Charles was, pretending to know where the kidnappers were and what they wanted. Glory seekers looking for fame, all lacking actual evidence. There was a case of on March 4th, 1932, a con man named Gaston B. Means was approached by Miss Evelyn Walsh McLean of Washington, D.C. She went to Means and essentially said, "Can you help me find this child?" And Means informed her that he felt certain he could secure a contact with the kidnappers because he had been invited to participate in the big kidnapping, but had declined. He claimed that his friend had been responsible for the Lindbergh kidnapping. He then demanded $100,000 from Mrs. McLean because the amount of money had basically increased, he said. But this was not to be the case. The kidnappers that he referred to as the Fox did not exist, and Mrs. McLean requested the money back, which I find very adorable. These men, essentially, Gaston B. Means, and who became known as the Fox, which was a Norman T. Whitaker, a disbarred Washington attorney, were apprehended and they were put in jail for 15 years of federal penitentiary. So they were apprehended. There was another case of suspected members of the so-called Purple Gang of Detroit, and various rumors and allegations concerning this gang were carefully and thoroughly investigated, but none of this turned out to be true. There were so many issues, so many hiccups, dead ends, red herrings, everything that led to the death of this baby, but as people believe, he had already died. So the entirety of the time, it could have been that this was a murder investigation from the get. So as I mentioned, Anna Hopman filed suits against the state. I said her name wrong. I apologize. Hopman filed suits against the state. Newspapers questioned how this case was investigated and how the investigation was held. Remember, Lindbergh was not an expert. Apparently I have trouble saying that word. Essentially, nothing professional seemed to be happening in this case, but the entire country was involved. J. Edgar Hoover was involved. The president was involved. So I would like to know what you think. Do you think that the facts pointed to Bruno? Were they planted, though? They pointed so perfectly to Bruno, I think. That's my opinion. Do you think that Violet Sharp was guilty? She killed herself. Was it because she couldn't deal with the pressure? Were they unkind to her when they asked her all those questions? Or is it just because she had other issues going on? And what about this Dr. Condon? Do you think he made everything up? He could have. There is a potential for that. Remember, he was a loquacious character and would do anything to keep the spotlight on him. What do you think? I'd love to know your thoughts. Now, as for this workout, you have a 10-second rest. We're going to get onto the ground now, and we are diving into some mountain climbers. I love listening to historical podcasts or murder mysteries or cases that are either unsolved or left with questions. I think it's important to keep your brain active while you're working out. so that you're not focused on the action of working out. I mean, not to say that your form goes out the window, but it just helps me get through the workout and focus on, getting to the end rather than focused on dying, All right, you're in your jumping jacks now. Jump out and jump in, reach those arms up. Oh, I'm gonna do some dancing. So anyways, yeah, I think the Lindbergh case, the whole scenario of everything, how it played out, the fact that Lindbergh was not a police officer or an investigating officer, the fact that there were so many glory seekers, the fact that the police was involved. Remember, this also happened in the 30s. So there was a lot of stigmatism against German immigrants or immigrants in general. So could it be that they found this Bruno character and decided that they just were going to, pin the whole thing on him because it was convenient? Remember, the Lindbergh baby was abducted in March of 1932, and we're now in 1936. Do you think that it was just convenient? Some cases are like that. The amount of times I have read online about someone being accused of it, but then later granted clemency because they were not actually guilty is absolutely ridiculous. All right, we're gonna rest now. As you can see, I am dripping sweat, having the time of my life. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you think of this case, all the questions that I asked. Let me know if I got the countdown wrong of the amount of ransom notes. And also let me know what you think could have been done differently, what can be learned from this kidnapping. I think there's so much to be learned. It's so interesting because this was very integral. It was the talk of Tuttletown, if I may. All right, now let's roll those shoulders back and forward, back and forward. Remember to take some deep breaths and focus. Great job. All right, let's switch over to the other leg. I'm just gonna get a good stretch, lean into it. Really stretch out that glute muscle, stretch out your hip flexor. Great work. Remember to breathe, keep your back straight. Try not to bend your shoulders. And if you can, then reach back, bend your knee up, and grab the opposite foot. Remember to keep your back straight here. Cannot stress that enough. You don't want to hurt your vertebrae. Great job. Okay, let's get into a down dog. As you can see, this is not my area of expertise, but I love getting a good down dog into my stretching routine because it just gets my hamstrings, it stretches out my glutes, it's great for straightening out my back, just focusing in and getting some good breathing in as well. So I hope you enjoyed this history lesson of where the Lindbergh Act and Lindbergh Law, or whatever you want to label it as in your brain, where it came from. I hope that you enjoyed the roller coaster that was this case. If you liked this, please let me know in the comments. Please also make sure to hit that subscribe button on your way out the door if you want to see more like this. If you have a case that you'd like for me to, retell and work out to, then let me know in the comments as well. Please also make sure to leave me a like. Please also make sure to hit that notification bell so that you never miss another video with the plants and I. All right, so now we're just basically in a pigeon here. We're just breathing, focusing in. We've got a little over a minute left of this cool down. Great job, everybody. All right, a minute left. Let's do some cat-cows. Breathe in. I don't know if you can see, but I am just dripping in sweat. It's very humid here. And my voice is cracking. Pardon me. Twist from side to side. Really pull in your your stomach there. Get some good stretches. All right, last 30 seconds. We're just going to get some inner thigh work here from side to side. And then we're gonna just crawl to the opposite side in a few seconds. Let's make our way there now. Stretch. Great job. Excellent work. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you are done. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating with me, for working out with me, for listening to the story, like I said and have mentioned and asked multiple times. Please let me know in the comments what you thought of this case. All right. My name is Trisha Maria. I hope you stay safe out there. Make sure to grab some water and make sure to rest. Ta-ta!